So today's topic is going to be the role of the North Carolinian Moravians and their role in the American Revolution. So the Moravians were Germans who had settled in the hills of North Carolina, but they did not actively participate in the Revolution. Though they didn't fight, their contributions definitely swayed the impact of the Revolution. So a couple descriptive words to describe them. They were a Protestant sect. They kept very detailed records, they were very organized, structured, they valued education, and they were pacifists. Now, they're originally going to be from Germany, but many ended up in England. However, they were feeling pressure to join the military, so they seized an opportunity by Parliament to relocate to the colonies to be freed from any military service. They originally are going to settle in Pennsylvania, but North Carolina, some land's open there, and they decide to purchase that land. Their missions are to evangelize the church there and to Christianize the Indians. One of the most interesting things about when they sent the men to begin the settlement in North Carolina was that they sent skilled men. They had a doctor, a minister, a shoemaker, a millwright, carpenter, tailor, baker, and farmers to really begin a settlement. They're really focused on how can we best organize our town to benefit all the people, both economically, socially, spiritually, etc. So Christopher Hendricks, he really talks about how the Moravian congregational town was structured, and even from the details of how they built their cities, we can see their social, religious, political, and economic values. So they had a central square, the town square. In the middle would be a religious slash government building, multi-purpose. In that central square is where they would have religious meetings. Any government proceeding meetings would be there, festivals, etc. And then the homes would be built around the outskirts of the square. Everything's very structured. The home lots are long and narrow so that they can have their home in the front. If it's a home that's closer to the Main Street area, it needs to be with siding, not just a log cabin. They're really focused on structure and if it can be pleasing to the eye as well. In the back, they would have land for gardens and to do work as well. Another interesting thing I found was the lot process to make decisions. So they would draw lots if they weren't sure of a decision that should be made. For example, they talked about building a new church building. So they put a piece of paper that said yes, a piece of paper that said no, and then the third one would be blank, and that would be the lot. That would be God's decision. They also had a board of elders who regulated their spiritual and secular lives. So similar to the congregational churches we see in New England, where there is not a clear distinction between this is the leader of the church and this is the leader of the secular government of the town. They're more of a theocratic society where it's blended together. So they're also a communal society, and this was originally developed for the early stages. It was only meant to be temporary, and its focus was to help the community develop, get off on the right foot physically and economically on the frontier. They also provided education for both boys and girls, which was pretty interesting that the women were so involved and that families were sending their girls who weren't actually part of the community to the Moravian schools. So their role in the revolution is discussed by John Wainlick, and he really talks about how the Moravians were caught in the crosshairs of the revolution. So they believed that rebellion against a civil authority was a violation of New Testament teachings. They were pacifists, so they didn't believe in fighting or bearing arms. And they also thought that the Act of Parliament had paved the way for their mission to come to the New World, so they felt a sense of loyalty to their brethren across the seas. But even though they're pacifists and they could not bear arms, they still found other ways to further the Patriot cause, just indirectly. So in Bethlehem, they had a general hospital and a depot of military stores. In Nazareth, officers stayed at the Brethren's house. Troops were quartered in the hall when passing through. And in Wachovia, there was a hospital there, and they cared for the Continental Army's troops and prisoners of war after the Battle of Cowpens. Even though they had limited supplies at this hospital, they still took care of the men there. Another important thing is that even if some of the Moravians men decided to participate in the war, the church formally forgave them for their participation afterwards. So another thing that was very interesting was the diary of the Salem congregation from 7th February 1781. And this really shows the true hearts of the Moravians. So when General Greene's officers came to the town and they inquired if they had boots that they could spare, they left most politely when they learned none were available. Another partisan, on the other hand, didn't treat the Moravians so kindly. When the Wilkes militia arrived, they plundered, demanding food and drinks with threats. When they found out the people were neither for or against the cause, they tried to trick them into showing favor for the crown. But the Moravians stayed loyal to the Patriot cause, although indirectly. Another thing that, well, the final thing that they're most noticed for is that they celebrated the first 4th of July in Salem, North Carolina. We usually think of the 4th of July as a celebration of a victory over Britain, but the Moravians actually instituted it to thank God for peace. So the governor of North Carolina, Alexander Martin, he declared the 4th of July a day of public thanksgiving. They had church services, they sang hymns in German, and they feasted with coffee and sweet buns.